Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of the show, bringing you another really cool guest today involved in creating a better and safer tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Diane DiEuliis, who is a Distinguished Research Fellow at National Defense University, where her research areas are quite broad and focused on emerging biologic technologies, biodefense, preparedness against biothreats, and the many specific topics under her quite broad research portfolio include things like dual-use life science research, synthetic biology, broadly looking at the United States bioeconomy, disaster recovery, as well as a lot of other really interesting disciplines in the area of behavioral and cognitive and social sciences as it relates to deterrence. Dr. DiEuliis currently has several research grants in progress, teaches foundational professional military education. Prior to joining National Defense University, Dr. DiEuliis was a Deputy Director of Policy and served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Planning in ASPR, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at HHS. She coordinated policy and research in support of various domestic and international health emergencies, including Hurricane Sandy and Ebola outbreaks. From 2007 to 2011, she was Assistant Director for Life Sciences and Behavioral and Social Sciences at OSTP, at the White House, at the Executive Office of the President. And prior to OSTP, she was a Program Director at NIH, where she managed a pretty diverse portfolio of neuroscience research in the area of neurodegenerative diseases. She's a National Merit Scholar, PhD in Biology from University of Delaware, and has well over 70 publications. A lot of really cool and interesting themes to get into today. We're honored to have with us Dr. Diane DiEuliis. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm just delighted to be here. And I didn't realize I had such a varied biography until I hear it from you, which is very flattering. Thank you. Again, delighted to be here.
It's really awesome having you, and I'm looking forward to sort of all the topics we're going to be getting into today. But would love to, as we typically do, start off at the beginning because it was quite interesting reading through some of your early work in the cellular and molecular aspects of neuroscience. Your dissertation was on these really interesting cells known as parasites that have all sorts of interesting properties in terms of neuroinflammation and autophagy and regeneration. You continued that work in your postdoc, going into sort of the whole range of, how we regenerate and protect the brain in areas like Parkinson's disease. Take us back a little bit, because we're going to be talking neurotech later on, but would love to sort of lay the background here, because you do have quite a broad set of the skills. So take us to the early history here.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I was one of those kids that was always interested in biology. I was always interested in being out in nature. And, I don't know if kids do this anymore, but we lived near a creek where we could collect tadpoles and watch them turn into frogs. And just that whole fascinating process from the time I was little. I was just always interested in the life sciences, always had lots of pets and animals and, turtles, guinea pigs, all that kind of stuff. And so I knew I wanted to do something with biology. And when I did my undergraduate at the University of Delaware in biology. And then it came time to start thinking about what I was going to do next. And when I decided to go to graduate school, and I sort of got into cellular biology when I went to graduate school, part of the reason for that is because I liked teaching and I wanted to do teaching. One of the more rewarding things during my graduate school process was doing teaching. But I really got into the whole cellular, how do cells function and how do they behave in our body and what kind of things affect them from, genetics, but also what kinds of environmental exposures in fact affect how living organisms grow and live and function and thrive. So that's how I really got into thinking about the cellular level and how I did my PhD in that space. And of course, teaching was a part of that. After I finished that, after I finished my PhD, I kind of got excited about doing a postdoc at the National Institutes of Health.
Mhm.
And that was my first introduction to the National Institutes of Health was when my thesis advisor had some friends that he was collaborating with down there, that he had done his postgraduate work with and some other research projects. Science is very incestuous, as we like to say. It's a lot of interconnected groups of people. I mean, at the end of the day, science is done by individuals, and all those individuals have different connections between them in their social universe and their science universe. And he had taken me down to the NIH for a day to use a really cool electron microscope that we didn't have in our lab, but they had it down at the intramural campus in Bethesda at NIH. And I just, like, my eyes popped. I was like, I want to be here. Look at all these people doing amazing work. They can look at cells with such, specificity. They can do all this really cool imaging. They have so much equipment and cool space here. And it's just, it's like 10 times the size of your university community, but it's still a university-like atmosphere. And so that's when I got interested in doing my postdoc. So instead of sort of taking that teaching route right away, I went into the deep research and studying cells at the intramural program at NIH. And that's where I was also exposed to neuroscience and getting interested in neurons in particular. So I wasn't just studying cells that line blood vessels like I had in my thesis, where I was looking at what makes the lining of our blood vessels do the things they do. Then I started looking at neurons, and now these things are connecting to each other and making signals in culture. And it's like a whole other level of how are cells, behaving in the body, and how are they potentially behaving in our brain, which kind of controls our behavior and everything we do. So that's sort of the path I took from, getting interested in biology, getting a PhD, and then going to the NIH. The reason that I mentioned the teaching thing, I kind of go around in circles, but I get back to something that I mentioned at the beginning. So bear with me. The reason I mentioned the teaching thing is that once you sort of get in a research track and you start working at the university level or the NIH level, you get a little farther away from teaching, interacting with students, interacting with other people doing science, because you're really focused on, achieving lab results, doing experimentation, going into the lab at all different times to complete studies, getting published, doing your papers, going to journals, this kind of stuff. And so I really started a trajectory that went way away from teaching at that point. So what's interesting to me is I've come full circle back now that I'm at National Defense University, even though I'm teaching very different set of things in science related to policy and biodefense and all that. I've actually full circle come back to teaching again. So I find that interesting, how my career, even though it traveled many places, I'm back to that original desire to teach. So I find that really rewarding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we need people like you teaching, some of these disciplines that are really, not only relevant in 2024, but they really are, some of them well, I'll say, the bleeding edge, and I'm really going to want to dive into some of this stuff just to expose the audience to some of what you think about on a daily basis, or how you think sort of over the frontier, let's say. Um,
Mhm.
let's go back though, to sort of around 2012, because it's here, when I was looking through a lot of your publications, it's sort of around here where we see various national security themes start showing up in your papers. And I'd love to touch on a couple of these, because well, they're not just cool, but they're very important for where we're going to be going. One of these was in 2013. This was entitled Neuroscience and Technologies. There's a new dual-use frontier, the importance of necessity of neuroethical guidance and articulation. And this is a fascinating paper because you not only, it's 12 years ago, and you're talking about, look, there's not only all these interesting genetic and cellular tools that are coming online, but we have all these other interventional techniques, transit and intracranial stimulation, nanomaterials. And, talk about this offers a wide potential, as you mentioned, for not just neural prostheses, but promoting what you term psychological hardiness. And then there's one line where you talk about the potential to assess, target, and manipulate the essence of human thought and action. Once again, we'll be going a little further on these fronts, but talk a little bit about what was happening at this period of time, because clearly these technologies are still kind of in the embryonic stage, but you were thinking a lot further over the horizon, let's say.
Yeah, gosh, you're reminding me about the time that's gone by since publishing that paper. And yeah, so the interesting thing there was I could see a lot of capabilities coming together. And a lot of what happens when we start talking about the security space around emerging technology, and I'll throw that term in and we can talk about that more. But as I think of emerging technology as these capabilities, and they feel sometimes incremental, so small advances, but sometimes they are big, boom kinds of discoveries that really change the whole landscape. But both are going on at the same time. So in neuroscience, what was happening was, it was very hard to look at the brain. It was very hard to see inside the brain and what was going on, as opposed to other parts of the human body where you can image, you can, be invasive. Your brain is inside of your head, and there's a thing called the blood-brain barrier. It's very hard to get molecules into the brain. It's very hard to see into the brain and to understand at the human level what's going on. And you could think of nature intending it that way, right? To protect this most important thing that defines our lives as living organisms. But what was happening was we started to be able to really image the brain in ways we hadn't done before. That was one. We started to be able to, now that we have cracked the human genetic code, we can start understanding what kinds of genes are expressed and proteins that are inside the brain and how they might be regulated. So you combine that with our ability to look at structure. Now we're able to look at function. And now we're able to look at human beings doing tasks while we're watching their brains, while we're measuring things inside their brains, and looking at their genetic profiles. And now all those capabilities come together, bring us this picture of, behavioral neuroscience that has a lot more technical data behind it than, sort of more psychosocial studies of human behavior. Right now, we're really starting to put technology behind it that says, hey, we thought this from doing some psychosocial studies, but now we can actually ask people to perform tasks and we can watch how they learn. We can look at what genes are expressed while they learn. We could tell someone to say lies and look at which part of the brain is active when people are doing different kinds of thought behaviors. So when you start to think about the implications of all that, then you can start to think of, wow, if we can grasp this understanding of the brain in this way, we can think about ways to manipulate it. We can think about not only ways of saying, hey, what's the best way to teach people X, Y, or Z? Well, then the opposite side of that is, how do we degrade somebody from being able to do those things, right? And so when you get into the national security space, you have to think about both sides. If we can think about how to use this technology for good, what happens when somebody flips it to use it for harm? And so back then, my colleague, I think that was with Jim Giordano, who's at Georgetown University, he and I started thinking about these things, and we actually started talking about these things with some folks in the military, because they were some of the people most interested in, how do we get our war fighters to be more psychologically hardy? How do we get them to be healthier? How do we get them to perform better in their roles? They have to learn a lot of tasks. They have to be able to use a lot of technology in their jobs. So how do we get them to perform better? And they want to perform better. And then we started thinking, well, maybe our adversaries don't want them to perform better, and how are they going to potentially try to degrade the performance of our war fighters? So hopefully that gives you a sense of what our thinking was there. And by the way, that field has just continued by leaps and bounds. I mean, if you look at what Elon Musk is doing now with Neuralink, where they're making direct, not just looking at the brain and making assessments of the brain, but actually connecting to the brain with computer interfaces to, mimic human behavior in those that have lost, the ability to control muscles or activities of daily living. So, wow, we've come a long way since that 2012 paper.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And definitely, I'm going to go more into that in a little bit when we start talking about, nefarious, let's say, actors and potential countermeasures against, issues of, how people might mess around with these technologies in the future. But before we go there, I just want to ask you about one other thing about it was also happening in this time period, because you, in addition to your publications, you also authored a chapter in this National Security Challenges book. It was chapter 3, entitled Neurobiological, Cognitive, and Social Science Insights on Radicalization and Mobilizations to Violence. I don't do politics and current social issues on the show, so I'm not going to go there. But say a couple words about this as well, because clearly we're in an interesting time in 2024 with regard to, say, radicalization in certain areas of our society, and would love to hear about how this particular chapter, so how you got to author this particular chapter, and because again, this is a fascinating read in the sense that you go into not just the neurobiology of what's happening during radicalization, but ultimately, you pose these concepts about strategies to prevent aggression and so forth. So take us a little there, if you would.
Yeah, there's some interesting backstory to that. Of course, this is a time when the United States was much more focused on countering terrorism than they were perhaps now. We've sort of moved into this age of what they call, great power competition. We're looking at China, we're looking at Russia. And so, but at that time, there was the sort of the whole countering radicalization and the concerns about terrorism. And I was involved when I was at the Office of Science and Technology Policy with the group, an interagency group that was on the social, behavioral, and economic issues in this space. And so when I mentioned before, a lot of sociocultural studies in the national security arena. That's what this group was involved with. And I actually inherited this committee from someone else who had departed the White House. And they said, well, we need somebody to, chair this committee, and can you do this for us? And I said, well, sure, I'm sort of a more neurobiology, cellular person, technical person, but I'm interested in the culture, is the socio-cultural stuff too. So I'd be happy to do this. And that's really what originated this idea of what kind of steps are going on in the brain towards someone becoming radicalized. And we put together this pyramid of sort of levels where people may experience, discontent, they may experience anxiety, but they don't necessarily do anything about it. And then sort of what are the levels that go up to where someone takes it to actual action, where, okay, maybe I've donated to some organizations, but now I'm really ready to, get out there and protest, or I'm really ready to get out there and take some kind of a maybe violent action on behalf of myself or a group of people. And so we went through some of the different aspects of that. And some of it relates to some very common circuitry in the brain that we've inherited throughout our development, which is that fight or flight, the fight or flight reflex, where, you begin to experience societal anxiety, as opposed to the saber-toothed tiger is going to kill me now, and the cycle of my brain is firing, I'm creating, adrenaline, I'm going to have to fight off the saber-toothed tiger. Well, we don't have to fight off the saber-toothed tiger anymore, but what we are experiencing is social conflict that triggers those same activation pathways in the brain. And now people have to deal with what's happening in their brain, what's happening to them physiologically. And that's sort of where it starts. And then it migrates to more, cognitive levels where, the part of the brain that fires in that panic stage is the amygdala, right? I always thought it would be very cool to have a rock band named the Amygdalas or something like that, or like a grunge band. I don't know if there is one, but anyway, it helps people remember the name of that part of the brain. The amygdala fires, and it fires to the frontal cortex. And that's where all your logical, rational decision-making happens, your executive function happens. And so you can overload that cycle, right? So if the amygdala is pushing your cognitive functions into a space where you can't reason them down, you can't calm it down, that cycle becomes magnified. And that's sort of a sort of layperson's, I think, understanding of the cycle. Lots of people talk about that amygdala to the frontal cortex loop. Jim Giordano and I sometimes compare that to the OODA loop, that the OODA loop can be mapped to this cycle where you observe your, environment, you react to, you assimilate the environment, you get a sense of the situational awareness, and then you figure out, you make a decision about how you're going to react. And that's kind of the essence of the OODA loop. And I think in some places, getting back to the radicalization question, I told you I go round and round and round and I come back to the original thing. It's kind of disrupting that OODA loop, right? In ways that, can be harmful in a big way in societies. So... yeah.
So again, there's a nice presentation again that goes along with the chapter that anyone listening and watching can find on the internet. But yeah, again, I just wanted to put out some of this sort of background work to sort of show the extent of what you were thinking about even 10, 15 years ago. So it's a really cool set of work you did there, Diane. So I just want to put that out there.
Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah, let's go to NDU now because clearly, you have, as I mentioned in the bio, quite a broad portfolio of topics that you focus on in teaching now. We've profiled some guests in the past from some of these other specialty higher education institutes like National Intelligence University, like JSOU at SOCOM. Take us a little bit into the background and history of NDU, if you would. We have a joke when my daughter's applying to college right now. She can't show up at NDU with her OCT scores and apply, but that's cool.
Right.
So, specifically focused on education, training, and professional development of national security leaders. Talk a little about the organization and just a little bit of sort of like how you create your syllabus. How you decide. We're going to talk about synthetic biology for the first couple of weeks and move on to cognitive and behavioral sciences. What happens if someone gets a D in preparedness? What do you do with them if they're in? But walk us through a little of that, if you would.
Oh, yeah, I would love to. So National Defense University is a unique place. And coming from my background of sort of the traditional academic pathway of the life sciences, I tell people I work at NDU and they sort of have the same questions as you. What is that place? What goes on there? So NDU is similar to some of the other colleges. And by the way, NIU and JSAL that you mentioned, which is down at SOCOM, I have collaborated with those folks. Sometimes I go to SOCOM and give courses down there if they invite me to, and at NIU and vice versa. So there's a lot of collaborative efforts. There's also a college up in Carlisle, the Army College. There's one in Rhode Island, which is the Naval College. So we do a lot of collaboration with these other schools. The National Defense University is actually under the Joint Staff, under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some of the Joint Chiefs of Staff live on our campus in Washington, D.C. We're right next to the baseball field, which is nice. People ask me, university. So I am, our university is funded by the Joint Chiefs. It's funded by the DoD. We are part of the DoD. And the people who come are by and large military professionals, but not completely. We get people from the State Department, get students from Homeland Security, we get people from the FBI, basically people who want extend their national security learning to a higher level, and in the military in particular, to people who are expected to move into leadership positions or be leaders in the military, where they're going to have to make difficult decisions on a national security level, right? So why am I there, a biologist? Around the time I got recruited to come to National Defense University from HHS, where I had been, was this idea that biology was becoming more and more important, and specifically biotechnology was becoming more and more important to the Department of Defense. And traditionally, there's kind of the two big silos at DoD. There was, medical countermeasures against weapons of mass destruction. And then there's just general force health protection, keeping people who serve in the military healthy and whole and, whatever they need, vaccinations, treatments, et cetera, emergency care, battlefield medicine, for example. So there came to be this realization that biotechnology is this emerging technology and capabilities are beginning to develop that mean we can do more with biotechnology outside of these two silos. And so what do I mean by that? Well, right around the time I came to NDU, there was the discovery of CRISPR, which enables the fairly precise editing of genes in pretty much any organism that you can think of, which means at the cellular level or even at the organism level, you can now physically engineer these organisms to do things that you want them to do, and whether that is for them to produce a high value chemical, or to be, placed into certain environments to do particular things. That was right at that time where everybody kind of went, whoa, I had before, there's iterative progress in the life sciences and capabilities, and then there's these big sort of translational shifts. And this ability for CRISPR to do genetic engineering was one of the big shifts, right? So now you could have engineers come in, sit at computers, and manipulate DNA in silico to figure out, how do I want to manipulate something to create a biological organism to do a certain thing? So I came to NDU, and I started teaching and putting together a syllabus that would not only help future leaders of the military and other components of federal government, enable them to understand the capabilities of this biotechnology that's novel and new, but also give them a little bit of the background on, why this is something they need to understand, why it has ethical dimensions, why it has dual use dimensions, why it has national security dimensions. Prior to this, if anyone had said, and as a matter of fact, I'll tell you one funny departure here is that when I first came to NDU, they have we have a big hall, and it's just like going to college, except you've got all these military people who are coming, and they've put aside their day jobs to come for, 2 semesters, 2 years, however long they're going to stay to do their degree programs. And we have a course day, right? So all of us who have developed a syllabus and are teaching a course, we stand out with our tables, and we have sign-up sheets, and hopefully they're going to come and my class. And so the first time I did this, and I explained to people, I'm the biologist, I'm here to talk about biotechnology and this. And I really had trouble getting anybody to sign up. They wanted to go learn they wanted to learn nuclear deterrence. They wanted to learn missiles. They wanted to learn about China. And what's China doing with nukes and missiles? And they wanted to learn war strategy. And that's completely understandable. But during the course of time that I've been there, I've been getting people more and more and more interested, and I would see my class numbers starting to increase because we experienced things like Ebola, COVID, this modernization of biotechnology. Biotechnology is now a modernization priority for the DoD, and you can say more about that if you're interested in that piece. And so that's kind of how the trajectory of my course and the topics that I was teaching on, it evolved, so each time something happened, I now do a case study on COVID because people need to understand how that happened. How are we going to deal better with it next time? What was the military's role in that? And what should it be? So yeah, I'm glad that people are getting more interested and understanding that this is a topic that benefits them in their national security career.
Showing up for class.
Yeah, right.
Especially in the era that we're in. And no, it's because again, we've been able to profile many of these DoD organizations, from DTRA to USANCA. Everyone obviously nuclear is still a concern, but this biodefense, biopreparedness issue is clearly quite paramount on all different fronts, whether we're talking about zoonotic viruses, whether we're talking about antimicrobial resistance issues, which is another sort of more silent pandemic that a lot of people believe we haven't really gotten our feet wet yet with how we're going to deal with it all. One topic that I found quite interesting that you've written a bit about and clearly in this era where we talk about a spillover and these concepts of like One Health, you're very you've written a lot about just the concept and the importance of scientific collections in this.
Oh,
Clearly,
yeah.
it's important that we have the folks out there that are finding the new viruses and sequencing this and that and understanding all the potential spillover possibilities that may exist. But you've written a lot about in publications like Emerging Infectious Diseases, the importance of these collections in the preparedness equation. Talk a little bit about this. I know this is very important to you, and I hope you could say a couple words about it while we're on that topic.
Oh, I'm so happy that you brought up scientific collections because I love that topic. And who doesn't? I mean, just walk into the Natural History Museum on the Mall in DC, or up in New York or in Philadelphia, and you just kind of, wow, look at all the cool stuff that's here. But scientific collections are so much more than that, as you've just mentioned. My role in working on this topic started at the White House. Once again, there was a committee, an interagency committee that was chaired by the Smithsonian and the USDA, actually, who maintains tons and tons of collections.
Yeah.
I got involved in this committee, and I sort of never left it. I to this day, I am still part of the collections committee throughout my various different positions I've had. Collections remain important across all of the life sciences. And so in particular, there's a couple of different areas where I could speak about the importance of collections, but since you brought up the One Health issue, I'll mention that one kind of specifically. And that is our understanding of collections across all the different kinds of pathogens and organisms, right, that host the pathogens. So it's not just understanding the pathogens themselves, but the idea that there are different organisms that naturally have these pathogens, and unless they make their way to human beings, they are not dangerous to those organisms that they are found in. So I'm thinking things like bird flu, swine flu, right now there is a great concern over H5N1, H1N1. We're experiencing animals in the United States, chickens, cows, etc., who are carrying these viruses, and they're extremely lethal to human beings, right? And so people worry about the ability of a particular virus sitting in those hosts, in these animals that we have contact with all the time, jumping over and to human beings, and causing a pandemic. The same thing can happen in the wild, as human beings continue to encroach on natural habitats where wild organisms are living. There's the potential for those pathogens to jump over into human beings because of that contact and their ability to adapt to a new host, right? So scientific collections enables us at all different points in that cycle of potential zoonosis to monitor, right? And to keep voucher specimens, right? How do we know when we discover something that looks like a new pathogen? What do we compare it to? What's our comparator? And our comparator are those voucher specimens we've had for a long time. We had a meeting at the Smithsonian, and I really enjoyed, because the head of the Natural History Museum in DC is a person by the name of Kirk Johnson, and he is the real sort of dinosaur hunter person. And I had never done any scientific collaboration with someone like that. We had a meeting at the Smithsonian to talk about the importance of collections. Here's a great example: hantavirus. Hantavirus is sometimes known as Four Corners disease, and it's carried by mice, but it's carried by a lot of other mouse-like rodents all around the Americas, North and South America. And they did a huge study on existing collections of these rodents from natural history museums, where they sequenced the DNA, and they looked for the expression of hantavirus across all these different collections. And so they're able to understand which strains of hantavirus are present in which countries, in which regions. They can look at, okay, what is the temperature, humidity, geography going to be like in this portion of Latin America this summer? Are we going to see an outbreak of this particular strain of hantavirus? And so collections provide that sort of landscape that help you understand where different strains of viruses can be prevalent, where there might be a risk of them having an outbreak in human beings. So to the extent that we can really build on that infrastructure, we could do a lot more in looking at the spread of disease in the One Health manner. I have to brag for just 1 second because you brought up the collections issue. When I was at the White House, we did a big report on collections that had never been done before, and we called it the Blue Report because the cover. I'm sorry, the Green Report, because the cover was green. And it was the first time we looked across all of the federal departments and agencies and said, what collections do we have? How should we be managing them? What's the best way for people to get access to them so that they can do research on them and so forth? And that was over 10 years ago. And now, just this past fall, we did, where are we with collections 10 years later? And we're calling that one the Green Report because the cover is green. But I can send you the link to that report that just came out. We quite recently had a meeting of the agencies with the launching of the report so that we could say, okay, here we are now 10 years later, and look at how much we can do with collections and how do we need to continue to build on this infrastructure. I'll end with saying, if you don't believe how important collections are, I can say that since the war started in Ukraine, many people understand that Ukraine is a huge farming country and has a huge portion of its geography devoted to agriculture. And Ukraine housed dozens and dozens of important agricultural collections for seed stocks and all the different kinds of things they grow agriculturally in Ukraine. And the State Department and Smithsonian mounted a huge effort in collaboration with some of our international partners to actually go in and rescue those collections from being destroyed during the war, which is, unfortunately still ongoing because they're irreplaceable. Once you lose those seed stocks, there are those germplasms that help us, grow food on the planet. Once you lose them, they are gone forever. So again, these have profound national security, food security implications, as well as the One Health thing. So thank you so much for asking me about that. It gave me a chance to brag about the Blue Report, which I will send to you after this call.
Send me that. We'll put those again. We'll put those links in the bio of the show. But I think that's especially as you bring up this issue with the seed stocks, because we also have touched on sort of agro preparedness and agro terrorism and things of that nature. So I think that's an important piece we don't normally talk as much about, that we need variety in these cultivars, and
we do, and we always forget about it, right? I think I'm not an expert in agriculture, but because of emerging biotechnology that's affecting agriculture, it's something that I'm paying more attention to. So I'm glad you said that, and I couldn't agree more. Agriculture is becoming very monolithic here in the United States, and we need to continue to spread our farming and be more diverse in farming so that we don't have this single big risk picture in the United States in terms of where our food is coming from, right? So yeah, I'm glad you're taking an interest in that.
Little bit about biosecurity, because again, you have a couple really interesting papers that stood out to me. One was this April 22 paper, Need for Modernization and Biosecurity in a Post-COVID World. And, you know, clearly, and we're not going to talk about zoonotic versus lab link here. We've had different guests on with different perspectives, but I would
Right.
like to talk a lot about sort of your vision on things like gain of function in terms of what we need to be doing, because one I had Andrew Hebler from OSTP talking about gain of function, the gain of function ban, the lift of the gain of function ban.
Right.
There's, obviously there's research here that's important to do. We need to do it properly. So if we could talk about that for a little bit, that'd be cool. And then second to that is your paper from 2018. This is a holistic assessment of the risks and benefits of the synthesis of a horsepox virus. And this is funny. Well, it's not that funny, but I had Rosamund Lewis on from the WHO, who, oversees their smallpox office. And I was joking with her when I did that interview about, why do you have an office? Smallpox is eradicated. And she went into, we got these other pox viruses that we should be concerned about. Now, this one, horsepox, from what I understand, is no longer with us. And
Right.
talk a little bit about why we should not be recreating extinct things.
Yeah. These are great questions. So I'll start with the first question, in talking about biosecurity and gain of function research. And this goes way back to some original papers that were intended to be published by some researchers named Ron Fouchier and a guy named Kawaoka from the United States. Ron Fouchier was from the Netherlands. And what happened was they were poised to publish some papers on the manipulations, the genetic substitutions in H5N1 that would cause the jumping of the virus from a small mammal like a ferret to a human being. And so just what I mentioned before when we were talking about these zoonoses jumping, and there's a big concern about H5N1 right now. These were people getting ready to publish. Here are the 5 mutations that would cause this thing to go from this animal into a human being. So everybody kind of sat back and went, whoa. The editor of Science magazine said, I've got these people ready to publish these papers. I'm kind of concerned that someone would now have a recipe to make a human version of H5N1 that could kill a lot of people. So it caught everyone by surprise. We were all like behind the 8 ball. How did the research get so far to the point of they're ready to publish? They already did the experiments. They're ready to publish it. And we kind of let it go to this point where now we're in a dilemma about publishing something that's potentially dangerous. So that's what kicked off the whole gain of function debate that frankly has been going on since then. And it has a lot of challenges with it. My position has always been that start at the front end. If someone's proposing research on gain of function that could have security implications, you need to do that risk assessment, that risk benefit assessment from the beginning before you do any experiment. You need to assess it and say, where's this, what road might this go down? And where might this research take me that could go to some dangerous places? And that doesn't mean you wouldn't do the research, but you need to think of ways to mitigate those risks. And if you can't, maybe think twice about doing the research, right? So that has always been my sort of take on this. I'm a fan of the start the risk benefit assessment early. If you can't explain to me the benefits and it's only got risks, then maybe don't do it. If it has a huge benefit and you can figure out ways to mitigate the risks, then okay, maybe we are in the right place and it's worth doing some experimentation.
Mhm.
So the paper that you mentioned that has more to do with the SARS-CoV-2, and I agree with you that there are two very entrenched camps about the zoonotic versus the lab leak. My colleague Jim and I, one of the reasons we wrote this paper is because we didn't want to engage that argument. So we said, what if? What if it was a lab leak? Where are the points of biosecurity that failed us? And similarly with the horsepox paper, the reason I did that as well with my colleague Gigi, and I think maybe Kavita Berger from the National Academies may have been on that, or Sarah Carter, a couple of other colleagues on that paper. The reason we did that was the same thing. What were all the safety and security steps they took along the pathway of creating horsepox? They were creating horsepox because they believed that they were interested in developing a novel smallpox vaccine. And the reason they chose horsepox is because they felt that the original smallpox didn't involve in cows. They believed it was closer to a horsepox strain in terms of the one that causes smallpox in human beings. So that has a lot to do with the etiology and the history of smallpox disease, which I am not an expert in. And lots of people have written articles about that as to whether or not their thinking was correct. But that was why they wanted to make the horsepox. So when we did that analysis, we wanted to look and see, okay, how did it get to that stage? Just like with the H5N1 papers, how did we get all the way to here? They've already created it. What were all the steps along the way? Did they do the right ones? Do we have the right steps in place so that we're having the right conversation about the risks, right? And so that's what we were trying to do. And in both of those papers you raised was, okay, we're at an endpoint now, and maybe we really need to see where are there gaps in our biosecurity approaches that mitigate risks, or in the case of the horsepox, I think they had gone to the committee, the smallpox committee, to talk about some of this. They had done all the correct things at their university level. But still people were shocked and surprised. People in the national security community were like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? And so it certainly begs the question of a wider dialogue, a broader dialogue, and more people weighing in on this type of experimentation than just someone sitting at a university and going through their university paperwork, and it gets approved. But then there's people sitting over here in the national security community or the biosecurity community that don't know anything about that, right? So, and don't have the chance to weigh in. So those were some of the things we tried to bring up in those papers that I hope can be part of our future in this space. A new dual use policy came out on gain of function just at the beginning of May. And it's more comprehensive and people are applauding it. So I think we're headed in the right direction, particularly in the aftermath of COVID. I think people have an awareness now that they may have not had prior to COVID-19.
Absolutely. And then while we're talking about biosecurity, let's go, well, I guess it's under the same umbrella, but we're going to be looping back now to sort of where we started off. But this principle of cyber biosecurity that you write about, and here again, you spoke earlier on about where we are with neurotech. We have the Neuralink coming online. We've profiled some of the non-invasive neurotechnology that folks like DARPA are working on. Amazing opportunities for human health, human potential, but we have to be aware of the potential dark sides here. You've written about how some of these tools, like the CRISPRs, could be used as so-called neuroweapons. I was a huge fan of the Manchurian Candidate, the original Manchurian Candidate. The remake was horrible, but I don't want to think of a world where some bad person, pushes a button and 10,000 people that have Neuralink implants, turn into assassins or jump off a bridge or whatever. But we've got to think of
Right,
these things in terms of countermeasures, right? I mean, whether, we talk about
right.
countermeasures for all this other stuff, for vaccines and chemical warfare and all that bit. Walk us into what the cyber biosecurity enterprise means and what you foresee in terms of how we should be developing a proper set of countermeasures against
Mhm.
potential bad actors in this space as we move down the line.
Yeah, sure. So when we get into these areas of cybersecurity, I it gets very complex really quickly. And as a person who is much more on the side of life sciences versus information sciences, I'm not, an IT expert, or as we are getting into the AI generation, definitely not an expert in AI. So it becomes really challenging fast for life sciences scientists to understand some of these risks. And so I try to divide it up into categories, which is a little bit helpful. So when I think about bioengineering, right, this is the sort of how do we genetically modify organisms? And that can be on the level of, yeast and doing fermentation to make, some cool products. And it can go all the way up to, larger scale organisms or even human beings. How will these genetic modifications happen? And so all of the data and the understanding of that genetic data, I call it biodata. I published a paper about biodata, and now that term is catching on. And so it's a lot more people are calling it biodata now. But who should have access to that? I mean, most of it is publicly available information. You can go to, Gene Bank and look up information on tons of organisms and their genetic sequences and figure out how to manipulate them. And then you can go to companies that make synthetic biology and make synthetic genes, and you can order the DNA you need and do your experimentation. So that's one set of data where how should that be protected? And do we have, what level of data requires protection and why? And then you kind of move to data that is more about people. Human genomic data, I think, exists in a very special category because it's about human genetic makeup. It gives us all our different characteristics, our features, different populations of people, and what kinds of genes are expressed in different populations. And so that becomes concerning when you think about someone might try and utilize that data to do harm against a particular population of people. Also, exactly what you have put your finger on is the so that's just what I call biodata, or if you're talking about human beings, and in specifics, if you're talking about genetic data about the brain, sometimes I call that neurodata. So that's kind of all the ghost in the machine, right? You can mine that data, you can tinker with it in silico, and then figure out if you can do something with it. It's an informational risk. But then when you get to this interface of, the human machine interface or the organism machine interface, now you're talking about a piece of technology that could potentially be hacked, right? So, people have pacemakers that they can control by their Bluetooth technology.
Yeah.
Your cell phone can be hacked. If you're an important person who's got something as simple as a heart implant, what if somebody hacked that and threatened to turn it off? It becomes as simple as that kind of thing. And then you start to get into scenarios that you described where someone might, have an implant that someone else can control and do potential harm or control that other human being. Those to me are sort of this very scary scenarios. And just recently I was part of a study. There's a group, an engineering group called IEEE. I don't know if you ever talked to anybody from IEEE. That's an engineers, a society of
Usually
engineers.
there's somebody that's an IEEE, fellow or something like that. But yeah, we've had a few.
Yes. Yeah. I am not a card carrying member of IEEE, but we recently had a series of chapters. They invited me to participate in the chapter on military ethics. It was all about sort of the ethical approaches to neurotechnology and these brain machine interfaces and how they could or should be used. And mainly it was about educating engineers, like, look, getting back to the beginning of the story again, just like when I was talking about dual use before, right before you propose the experiment, what kind of security things should you be thinking about? Same thing with neurotechnology. I'm getting ready to build a neurotechnology. I need to think about all of the risks that are implied, even before I build it. And so, and what are all the ethics? What are all the ethical things if I intend to use this in a human being? What are all the ethical challenges there? So we've been working on this report for, 2 years now, but I do think it's available on the IEEE website now. And I contributed, there's many other chapters on, how might neurotechnology be, leveraged in legal situations where, someone is accused of a crime and they have a implant of some kind that they claim, was instrumental in, committing a particular crime. In the sense of the military, if you're giving somebody a capability that most normal people don't have, what happens when the person leaves the military and now they're part of civilian life and they have a technology or a chip in their brain that no one else has. Do you take it away from them? Is it invasive? Is it non-invasive? Is it, a thing they can, wear and then take off? But these are all really thorny dilemmas and questions that I don't think we've answered yet. And so as we move down this path towards Neuralink and people, getting implants, it's great for therapeutic use. But when you go beyond therapeutic use, what are the rules? What are the guardrails? So that was a bit of I think I went off on a bit of a rant there. But
No, it's a good rant, and we have to think of these, and unfortunately, I'm just I'm from the life sciences space, and I just spent most of my time in childhood. I just watched too many movies growing up because clearly, Manchurian Candidate was awesome, but there was also this really cool. I think it was the Dennis Quaid or Randy, one of the Quaid brothers. It was called Dreamscape back in the early '80s, and as we're talking, we've had guests on talking about sort of dream manipulation now, and you start thinking about how you get someone a nightmare, get someone a really bad nightmare, but forget about it. We'll talk about that at some other time. But again, it's important we think.
Yeah, if you're looking for a scary one, I just watched one the other night, which I think was on Netflix, called Upgrade. It's about a guy who gets a quadriplegic who gets a stimulator. So that one will scare a lot of people.
Yeah. I started on that, but
yeah,
no spoilers.
exactly.
But yeah, no, I'm with you. But nonetheless, important things to focus on, and again, think over the horizon as you've been doing. So no, this is great. So what else is going on that we should know about? What's coming up for you? I know that you do get out there sort of on the conference scene a bit. You were at BioDigicon last year. I think you have something coming up at a New York City neuromodulation conference. What's going to be happening for the rest of 2024 in terms of your research, your lecture schedule, please, and anything I missed also, please take the floor.
Oh, great, thanks. So I think again, on the neurotech, that's going to continue to push forward and be a hot topic. I think that we're going to see, again, we see leaps and bounds, but we also see a lot of increments in between. I just saw something the other day about, sort of this highly detailed brain map that just came out, I think from MIT, or it might have been, yeah, I think it might have been MIT. So I think the neurotech space is one to continue to watch. NATO just put out their statement on sort of ethical use and trying to traverse this space. DARPA's got a number of programs going on now. So again, watch this space on the neuro stuff. With regard to emerging biotech, just in general, I think I mentioned that the DoD has biotechnology as a modernization priority. And the White House came out with an executive order on the bioeconomy and how we need to have a bioeconomy plan and strategy for the United States so that we can be competitive. And a lot of what the bioeconomy is about is using biotech in all different sectors, not just health and agriculture, as we've talked about, but energy, fuels, materials, all these different kinds of things where we're moving away from petrochemical or chemical platforms and moving to more sustainable biological platforms. And all of that is great. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. We've already seen things like, the North Face, spider silk parkas and clothing. We've seen people innovating, which I think is really exciting, making palm oil from organisms, or making cement from algae. These are big game changers for how we do industrial manufacturing in the country. And I think we're going to see, hopefully, a lot of cool biomanufacturing happening instead of the sort of traditional petroleum manufacturing that's, as we know, has a lot of sort of toxic waste associated with it and uses a lot of fossil fuel energy. So I think that's another cool space to watch moving forward. And I think a lot of my work with DoD is going to evolve around, if DoD starts doing biomanufacturing and making fuels and propellants and energetic materials or uniform materials or sensors or things, using biology instead of the ways they have been using to make those things, are there any vulnerabilities there? Or will our adversaries try to, do something to sabotage those approaches? So that's kind of what I see in my near-term future. I will say that of getting back to teaching and what students don't know what they don't know, right? I will say that everyone who has taken my course has said, oh, I'm so glad you taught me about synthetic biology, because I knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about this type of manufacturing. I knew nothing about that these biological things were possible. And now I know. So, and they were glad to know, not just as, maybe potential future leaders, but just also in their lives, that these kinds of biological advances are going to touch on people's lives, whether you happen to be in military spaces or not. They have the potential to change our lives and how we live them. So important on all fronts.
Absolutely. And again, coming back to that theme, which I know you're passionate about in terms of the collections, when it comes to things like, biohydrogen or whatever, using algae to power an aircraft carrier, we need good biodiversity and collections so we can find those genes.
Exactly. And we haven't even looked across all those collections for the cool things they might be able to do, including they might be making some cool, antibiotics or something.
Exactly.
So we need to do all of it.
Yeah, it's I don't had a chance to watch. I had Craig Venter on a couple of months ago, and he's talking about these billions of new genes that he's finding in the ocean. So it's going to be the whole blue biotechnology side of things, and be able
Oh, yeah,
to tap these sort of extremophiles and all these other species that we just never been able to culture and use their genes
absolutely.
for stuff is going to be exciting. So no, I'm excited. I'm excited for this future. I'm excited that you're teaching these important students about all of these themes because they're so crucial in sort of this bio future and bioeconomy that we're all going to be living in. So I'm excited, and it's great talking to you about these themes. I hope we have the opportunity to maybe do a follow-up next year to see where everything else is heading. But really great stuff, Diane, and I'm so happy I had the opportunity to finally get you on the show and to talk about sort of everything you've been involved in. Again, for everybody out there that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Diane DiEuliis, Distinguished Research Fellow, National Defense University. Diane, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while, to educate us on a range of really cool topics. Obviously, thank you for everything you do to keep our country safe. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for creating a better and safer tomorrow for all of us via the work you've been doing. Really great story, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Ira, thank you so much. And I would love to come back again anytime. This has been a great conversation.
Great having you.